your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. God from age to age, though the earth may pass away, your word remains the same. Oh, your history can prove there's nothing you can't do. You're faithful and true. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. So great, so great, your faithfulness through every season. I've seen it, I will see it. Yeah. I'll put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my open firm foundation. He'll never let me down. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my open firm foundation. He'll never let me down. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my open firm foundation. He'll never let me down. No, he'll never let me down. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me.
We've got a lot to cover tonight in just a little bit of time. We can do it. We can do it. You know how I know that? Because the Word says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. We are in chapter 23 of the book of Matthew. We are coming towards the conclusion of the book after about 6 months. I mean, actually, that little 21 there, it means that this is the 21st week that we have been in Matthew. So, almost 6 months. So, we are going to discuss tonight chapter 23. Jesus had just had a confrontation with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and these religious leaders. been a rather heated conversation at times. Jesus denounces their practices, he denounces their beliefs, right there at the very beginning of chapter 23. And he turns from the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who he has silenced with his scathing remarks, and he begins to address himself to the multitude of people now. No doubt they had gathered around to listen. Pharisees and Sadducees are still standing there, sort of steaming inside, because they just got put in their place. But Jesus now is addressing himself to the multitude and to the disciples, but very definitely still within earshot of the Pharisees and the scribes. They can still hear what he's saying, and believe me, they are listening closely. But he begins to talk to the people concerning the very people who are listening in, the scribes and Pharisees. I mean, imagine that. You got a group that you've just castigated, and then you turn from them and you go to the multitude, and they're still there, and then you say, you know, these Pharisees and Sadducees, they're rotten people. And they're right there. Sounds like a Donald Trump move, doesn't it? Fake news, all of them, fake news. But he begins to talk to the people concerning these particular groups. And the scribes were a group, let me just tell you who they were. The scribes were a group which began at the time of Ezra, some 400 years before Christ. The Jews returned from the Babylonian captivity. They were rebuilding the temple at the time, and they brought out the scroll of the law, and they read it to the people, and they explained it to the people. It brought forth a revival among the people. But the scribes continue from that point on. And they were the men who were given the task of studying the law, interpreting the law, and explaining the law to the people. These people couldn't read. So they depended on the scribes to interpret and to tell them what the law meant and what it said. You know, they had to depend upon them to get the interpretation from the Hebrew. And these men gave their lives to the interpreting and the understanding of the law. They studied it. They studied it jot and tittle. And also to defining, like, when the law says, thou shalt not bear a burden on the Sabbath day. What constitutes bearing a burden? That's what the people want to know. If you got a wooden leg, would that constitute bearing a burden on the Sabbath day, to strap on your wooden leg? Am I now strapping on a burden? If you had a false eye, would it constitute bearing a burden to put in your false eye on the Sabbath day? So they try to determine just what does constitute bearing a burden. And that's how they treated the law. They would go through and dissect every little section of the law, and then they would try to tell the people what it meant. And ultimately, they ended up with some 50 volumes of explaining what the law meant. It was called the Mishnah. If you ever want to look at it, let me know. But you'll have to come over to the house. So that's why when Jesus earlier said to his disciples, unless your righteousness exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees, you're never going to enter the kingdom of heaven. He said, for you have heard that it hath been said by these scribes. Anytime Jesus said that, he was saying, this is what they have been telling you that it means. This is what the law, but I say unto you, this is what the law really means, really meant, you know. And when Jesus was through, they were astounded because he didn't teach like the scribes and the Pharisees. He taught with authority. And he said, this is what they're telling you, but this is what I say. This is what it really is. And so he taught with authority. The scribes were one group. The Pharisees were another group. They were the ones who also tried to put into practice all the little nuances of the law, these Pharisees. They sought to live by the law fully and completely. They spent their entire lives devoting their lives to the strict adherence to the Mosaic law. The Jews themselves had described the Pharisees into 7 different groups. They called one group the shoulder Pharisees. That is, they wore their religion on their shoulders, so to speak. Everything was outward, so that everything they did was for outward show and display. Then there were what they called the bruised and bloody Pharisee group. A Pharisee would never be caught in public talking to a woman, even if it was, say, his wife. I mean, they were so strict that they weren't to be moved by any kinds of passions toward women, so they would never talk to a woman publicly, even their wives. But there were some of them who were so strict that whenever a woman would be approaching, they would close their eyes, and they would always be bumping into posts and buildings and things. And so their faces and their noses were always scraped and scabbed and bloody, and they were called the bloody and bruised Pharisee group. I can't make this up. I don't have the capacity to make that up. That's true. Then there, you think that's funny. Then there were the humped back, also called the tumbling Pharisees. And these were men who sought to put on such an appearance of humility. They were always walking around bowed down, just to show their humility. And they were so humble, they wouldn't lift their feet. They would shuffle their feet. They were so humble. So they were always stumbling. And so they called them the tumbling Pharisees, or the humpback Pharisees, because they were always bent over. So in these various groups, they did have what they called the godly Pharisees. Those that were genuine, those that were very honest. But out of the 7 groups, only one qualified in that category, which is very interesting, isn't it? Let's start with verse 1. I had to give you that long introduction because we're going to be talking about these various groups, and so you should know who they are. And Jesus spoke to the multitudes. Now he turned to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat." In the Greek, it is that they have seated themselves in Moses' seat. In other words, they have declared that they themselves are the interpreters and the teachers of the law. They have placed themselves in Moses' seat, a position that they have just assumed. Verse 3, "Therefore, whatever they tell you to do, that observe and do." In other words, they're there to teach you the Mosaic law. Learn and observe the law. "But do not do as they do, according to their works, for they say, but they don't do themselves." In other words, the law is right. Listen to the law. Learn the law. Obey the law. But don't follow their practices because they say one thing and they do another. And basically, the fault that Jesus found with the Pharisees was that their religion was all outward. It was all for show. It was all for display, all to impress people. And there are those even today who do many things to impress people. They were more interested in impressing people than they were impressing God. So back to the Sermon on the Mount, the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. As he was talking about righteousness, he said, "Be careful that you don't do your righteousness before men to be seen of men." This business of trying to show off how spiritual you are. Doing things just to draw the attention of people. So they say, "Oh, isn't he or she spiritual? Oh, did you see that? Oh my." There are many affectations of spirituality. There's a horrible thing about our flesh, and that is we want to be known as deeply spiritual people. It's a crazy thing about our flesh, but it's true. Our flesh wants glory from people as being a very deeply spiritual person. So we have ways of sort of demonstrating and showing just how spiritual we are. It could be a tone of voice. It can be with affectations. It can be the folded hand and sort of the tilted head and, oh yes, oh yes. And then there's a tendency towards that, doing things for an outward show. That was the thing that Jesus had against the Pharisees. He said, when you give, don't be like the Pharisees who like to make a big show over their giving. They like to get a band together and march before them, as they are giving. Like to draw attention, so they show that they're dropping their money in the treasury of the church. Don't be like that, he said. When you fast, don't go around with long faces that you appear that you are fasting. When you pray, don't be like the Pharisees who stand on the street corners, bobbing up and down so that everybody can see them. God is looking at the heart, he says. So many times the outward things are done to attract the attention of people. Interesting, you go today to the Western Wall and you watch them as they come to pray. Some of them are very loud. Most of them are bobbing, weaving, and bowing. And it draws attention. The more spiritual you seem, the more spiritual people may believe you are. And if out of the corner of my eye I see somebody watching me, I'm going to bow more. I'm going to those affectations are going to be activated more. And people look at that and they say, "Wow, look at those devotional people." You ever see them people at the Western Wall? And you say, "Wow, they must really be spiritual, you know." But Jesus is condemning anything done to attract attention to yourself. To lay it out straight, during the singing of the choruses, there are people who will stand up there in the auditorium, and some of them do a little dance and all, but things to attract the attention of the individual. How many heard that loud outburst today in church? You know what that was? It was a sound glitch through one of our microphones. And it scared her when it happened. It was Luke-ny, I'll just tell you. It was poor Luke-ny, because something got slid up, and all of a sudden she burst out real loud, and she, "Oh my God," and that made it even worse. Scared me to death. I almost swallowed my cough drop. I was looking for the elders going, "Oh, we got one of them." But that's what happened. Poor Luke-ny, of all people, right? Poor Luke-ny. So she wasn't trying to bring attention to herself. But anyway, that happened. Verse 4. "For they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders." In other words, they place on people these heavy regulations, but they don't even keep the regulations themselves. They themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. They won't even try to lift with one of their little fingers. But all their works, Jesus said, here it is, they do to be seen by men. That was the flaw, the public display to be seen of men. They make their phylacteries broad. The phylactery was a little leather box. And under the Mosaic law, they were told to bind the law to their forehead and to their wrist. Even to present day, they have these phylacteries. And when they go up to the Western Wall to pray, they bind them, wrapping a little box on their forehead. The box on their forehead has 4 compartments. Contains 4 passages from the book of Deuteronomy. And the box on the hand has the same 4 passages, but not in 4 compartments, just 1 compartment in the little leather box. These guys were making big boxes, broadening their phylacteries. Not the little box, they made the big box on their head. And so Jesus said, they are expanding and broadening their phylacteries, walking around with huge boxes on their foreheads and on their hands. And they enlarged the borders of their garments. Again, demonstration of, hey, we really got it over on you. We're more spiritual than you. And then they were told to put tassels on the borders of their garments, a reminder that we're heavenly people, we're spiritual people. So they began to enlarge the borders and make long tassels as if to say, hey, I am really, really spiritual. They loved, verse 6, they loved the best places at feasts. They loved the uppermost rooms at the feast, the places of importance. The most honored seats were at the right hand and the left hand of the host. And there was always competition for those places of honor and position and authority. I want to sit at the head table, Always maneuvering, working their way into positions of prominence in front of the people. The best seats in the synagogues. In those days, the people in the synagogue sat with the ladies on the right, the men on the left. In conservative synagogues, it's the same way today. Men are on the right, men are on the left and the ladies are on the right. But up in front, facing the congregation, were all of the elders, those chief seats, and that's where they liked to sit, in the chief seat places, so they could look out at the people coming in. All the people could see them and recognize, These are our leaders. And they loved, verse 7, the greetings in the marketplace and to be called by men rabbi, rabbi, you know. They'd wear their fancy robes and walk through the marketplace hearing people say, good morning, Rabbi. Oh, good morning, Rabbi. Morning, Master. Morning, Master. They loved that sense of spiritual power and status. And they wanted to be looked up as the spiritual men of the community. Verse 8, but you, Jesus said to his disciples, don't be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. We're all brothers in Christ. God will listen to your prayers just as readily as he will listen to mine, folks. None of us have any hierarchy. None of us have any place of higher standing before God. God does not do that. Just because God has called and appointed me as a pastor, teacher in the church, does not mean I have a closer relationship with God than you do, or that I've got some kind of special in with him, that, you know, he's going to listen, he's going to answer my prayers more readily than yours. It does not mean that at all. What it does mean is that I have a greater responsibility before God to be careful about what I teach, because I will be held accountable for how I handle the Word of God. But it doesn't make me any closer to God to be a pastor of a church. Doesn't make me any more spiritual. Doesn't give me an edge over you in your relationship with him. We are all equal at the foot of the cross. Can you say amen? Amen. Then he said in verse 9, don't call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. And I'm going to clarify this for you, because I know there are a lot of questions about that. Always have been over the years. I'm here to help you. The Father is the one who has begotten. He's the one who gives life. Spirituality comes from the Father. And there's only one who has given us spiritual life, and that is God. So don't call any man father. There's no man who gives you spiritual life. It is God who has given you spiritual life. He has begotten you. As Peter said in his epistle, thanks be unto God who has begotten us again unto this living hope by the resurrection. It's God who has begotten us into our spiritual life. Therefore, you are not to call any man father on earth in a spiritual sense. Understand? He's not talking about a physical sense. He's talking about a spiritual sense, because he said it is God who gives spiritual life. Verse 10, do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever exalts himself will be humbled. He who humbles himself will be exalted. Jesus said to his disciples, the Gentiles love to exercise lordship, but it will not be so among you. Whoever would be great among you, let him be the servant of all. Here again, the repetition. True greatness lies in serving others. That's where greatness lies, in serving others. You remember when Jesus was having the Last Supper there with his disciples, how he took that towel, he girded himself, began to wash the disciples' feet. And when he was finished, he said, do you see what I have just done? They said, yes. He said, you call me Lord and Master, and that is correct. I am your Lord and Master. But if I, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, as a servant would do in the house, you also ought to wash one another's feet. That is, if I can serve you as your Lord and Master, how much easier should it be that you serve others? We are to serve one another. Washing others' feet was not the goal in that demonstration. He's teaching servitude towards one another. The greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the servant of all, he said. The way up is down, the way down is up. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, he will lift you up. He that exalts himself shall be abased. So learn the lesson of the privilege of joy of serving the Lord. Whatever you do in word or deed, do it as unto the Lord. And inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, Jesus said, you have done it unto me. How many times do I get somebody coming and saying, Pastor, will you pray for me? I hate my job. I got to go to work in the morning, and I just hate the thought of it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate the people I work with. I hate the leadership. And I always go to Colossians, and I always remind them that you're not working for man, that everything that you do as though you are doing unto the Lord. Do it unto Him. In the meantime, get online and find a job search or something, you know. You maybe pray that God will change your job, but it doesn't mean you have to go to work angry, upset, mad, frustrated, and depressed because you're working for God. So, inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, Jesus said, you've done it unto me. Just a cup of cold water given to a prophet in the name of the Lord reaps the whole reward of a prophet. Imagine that. 1 cup of cold water given to a prophet in the name of the Lord reaps a prophet's reward. Serving brings blessing, joy, and glory. The joy of simply being a servant, learning to give and serve one another. Now, Jesus turns directly back to the Pharisees and he begins to pronounce 7 woes. Woe, W-O-E. The word woe, very, very difficult to translate. I'll do my best. We do not have an exact English word for the Greek term woe. The Greek word speaks of wrath. It speaks of sorrow. It's a combination of wrath and sorrow. So you have to come up with your own words. Somebody came up with woe. I guess that'll do it. So when you read this, I don't want you to see fire in the eyes of Jesus. I want you to see his tears. And the Lord really, by his Spirit, had to show me that. Because it was so easy for me to see Jesus condemning them, beating them. But the Holy Spirit revealed to me not to see the fire in his eyes, but see the tears. Because that word woe is equally about sorrow as it is about wrath. So the combination of judgment and sorrow. And it begins almost like a lament. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often would I have gathered your children together? I mean, this is a lament. And he's saying this. Yes, there is the denouncing of the practices, but there's also that deep sorrow of heart because of their blindness. I'm not just pouncing on them. I'm grieving. They're struggling to be righteous. They have a form of righteousness, but they're so blind to the real truth, and they will not open their hearts to it. Truth is presented, but they will not, he said. Jerusalem, how often would I have gathered your children, but you would not. You're not going to hear it. You will not open your heart. So they're bound and steeped in their tradition. And they're locked into this system and they can't seem to break free. And it produces sorrow in the heart of Jesus. But it also produces judgment. So woe unto you. You think you're on the right path. You think you're doing the right thing. But you're on the way to destruction. Verse 15. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. The hypocrite was the actor in the Greek drama. The hypocrite was the actor. He was the one who held up a false face. He might hold up a mask with a big smile on it, but behind that mask was one of sadness and sorrow, the false face, known as the hypocrite in the Greek movies. The hypocrite is one who wears a false face, who puts on an act, who is one thing on the outside, something entirely different on the inside. You know what? God looks on the inside, and aren't you glad? Man will always look on the outward because he can't see the inward. And man will judge from only the outward and never the inward. And so that works both ways, good and bad. You might be able to deceive man, but God looks at the heart. You can't fool God. Look, Jesus says here, for you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, to win one convert. And when he's won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. You shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. You neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. By your rigid rules and regulations, you discourage men from trying to enter the kingdom of heaven. They had all of their systems. If you want to, then you must do this, 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 and this. Impossible. By laying up all these barriers, they themselves did not go in. They weren't even observing the very rules they were imposing on others. They were setting standards they themselves would not and did not keep. Verse 14, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, you actors. You devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. You took advantage of people. You preyed upon widows, you robbed them, you stole from them. Not too far from some of the televangelists today who send out pleading letters to elderly widows on Social Security, suggesting they go to the bank and borrow money to send in help so that they can bail them out of their latest emergency. Awful quiet. Woe unto you! Woe unto you! Verse 15, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You travel land and sea to win one proselyte. A proselyte was one who was not a Jew, but who was attracted to the Jewish faith. There were many people in the day that were drawn to Judaism. In the synagogues, they would gather with the Jews. They would listen to Scripture. They were interested in that concept of one God because at that time there was great pantheism. I mean, various multiple gods, many gods everywhere. But these seekers were attracted to the idea of one God, and it was attractive to them. And they would come to the synagogues on Sabbath, and they would listen to the Scriptures, and they would want to learn. And these were the very people Paul often ministered to during his missionary journeys. When he would go into a new city, he would first go into the synagogue because there were these people who already had an ear to hear. They wanted it. They wanted to know the Word. They were fascinated with what Paul had to say about Jesus Christ, the fulfillment of Scripture and all. And they were not all proselytes. A proselyte was one who went all the way, not just listening, not just taking notes. They went all the way. They went through the rite of circumcision. They were baptized into the Jewish faith. Oftentimes, these converts became even more zealous than the Jews themselves about their religion. And that's what Jesus is addressing here. You encompass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when you made him twice as much a child of hell as yourself. In other words, their converts were not being brought into truth. Tradition, but not truth. Into the same system of self-righteous bondage that condemned their teachers. Verse 16, woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, it's nothing. But whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obliged to perform it. That was the way they were interpreting things. The scribes had developed an elaborate system of legal loopholes. God had said, you will not take an oath falsely, meaning you must not swear deceitfully or make promises that you do not intend to keep. But they began to ask, well, what exactly does that mean? What if you swear by the temple? Is that binding? Do you really have to keep it? And they reasoned, no, not if you swear by the temple. That's not binding. That temple thing is a little ambiguous, so we'll swear by the temple. That way we have a loophole that if we don't keep our word, then we're not bound by it. You can get out of that one. But if you swore by the gold that was in the temple, oh, that was different now. That was binding, they thought. You had to keep that law. Likewise, they said, if you swear by the altar, that's not binding either. It's vague, they say. You can take that oath, You can make a promise and later dismiss it, and you had a legal loophole because it wouldn't be binding. But if you swear by the sacrifice that's on the altar, oh man, you've had it. You've got to keep that one. So going down the line with all these crazy interpretations, Jesus said, verse 17, you fools, you blind guides, what's greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? Jesus, again, this is what they were teaching, but now he lays it straight. Verse 18. And whoever swears by the altar, it's nothing, but whoever swears by the gift that is on it, he's obliged to perform it. Fools and blind, what's greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it and by all things that are on it. He who swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you actors, you hypocrites. You pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. He speaks of giving their tithes. They were so scrupulous in their tithing. 1/10 of your crops was a tithe to the Lord. You'd bring in 1/10 of your wheat, 1/10 of your fruit. You would tithe it to the Lord. These fellows went further. They had all their little spice gardens in the window boxes in the kitchen. And they all grew their little anise and their little cumin and mint. And these guys would tear off the little mint leaves. 9 for me, 1 for the Lord. 9 for me, 1 for the Lord. And they would count the little seeds of the spices. And they were tithing of their spices, measuring them out very carefully with the art of a pharmacist. But they were cheating at the scales. These people were cheating. They were unscrupulous in their dealings with others. They were unmerciful, unloving, unkind, ungracious, uncompassionate. Jesus said, you're emphasizing the wrong things. You ought to tithe, yes, he says, but don't leave out being merciful, being fair, being honest, being true, being gracious. You blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. We're all familiar with that. Let me explain it to you. Literally, rather than strain at a gnat and swallow a camel is how I learned it. You strain at a gnat, you swallow a camel. Literally in the Greek, it is you strain out a gnat. When they would drink their wine, they would pour it through a cloth because little gnats would come and land on the cup. And some of them would get caught and drown in the wine. So they would always pour it through, now it's not kosher. So they'd pour it through a cloth into the cup before drinking to strain out any little gnats that might be in it. They don't want to swallow one of those little gnats. A gnat was unclean. It was an unclean insect. But Jesus said, you strain out these little gnats, but you swallow camels. In other words, you're very exacting on stupid little things, and then you just ignore the weightier things, justice, mercy, love, kindness, gracious, compassion, and all of that. And so he gets after them in verse 25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You cleanse the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside they are full of extortion and self-indulgence. You are full of excesses. You're gluttonous. You heap up for yourselves excess. You hoard excesses. Oh, the outside of you looks so good. You make it look real clean. You make yourself look real spiritual. But inside, you're full of extortion. Blind Pharisee, verse 26. First, cleanse the inside of the cup and the dish, that the outside of them may also be clean. Take care of the inside, so that would transfer then to the outside. What's inside, Jesus said, is more important than what is outside. And what is inside, if it's clean, will work its way out. Get your heart right before God, and your life will become right before God. Your whole life. The outward religion doesn't get it. God is interested in what's going on in your heart. Get your heart clean. Clean up within, and the outside will follow. Verse 27. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you actors and hypocrites. You're like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Is this pretty scathing or what? I'd say this is pretty scathing. Under the law, if you touched a dead body ceremonially, you would be unclean. You would not be able to enter the temple to worship until you went through the rites of purification, and that took a while. If you touched anything that had been touched by a dead body, you would be unclean. So to touch a sepulcher, because there was a dead body also touching it, would make you spiritually unclean. And most of the sepulchers, what I mean by sepulchers is graves, most of the sepulchers were along the roads. Interesting, even today as you travel in Israel, you see many of these large limestone tombs right alongside the road. Many modern roads follow the ancient Roman routes. And as they're excavated for new highways, you can still see scores of these big limestone tombs. And when pilgrims were making their journey to Jerusalem to worship at the feast, if they happened to touch one of these sepulchers on the way, they were disqualified, they were unclean, they were unable to worship. So in the month of Adar, as the people prepared to travel, they would go out and they would whitewash, they would paint all these tombs markings so they would stand out and that you wouldn't accidentally bump into one. You make them really bright. You didn't want to accidentally lean against one and discover too late that you were ceremonially unclean. You came all that way. You're traveling to Jerusalem. So as the travelers moved along the road, these whitewashed tombs looked so beautiful and clean. But inside, they were full of decay and skeletons. Jesus said, that's the way you are. Outside, you make yourself look so clean, so beautiful, so bright and spiritual. But inside, there's putrefaction. Outwardly, you appear righteous to men, but within, you're full of hypocrisy and iniquity and sin. Verse 29. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and you say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Oh boy. Down in the Kidron Valley, just below the Temple Mount, are these beautiful tombs carved into the cliffs. And the ornate tomb of Zechariah, the tomb of Absalom, and others. And you said you built these tombs of the prophets and decorated the sepulchres of the righteous with all kinds of ornamentation. And you say, oh, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have killed the prophets like they did. We're better than they are. We're more spiritual than they were, than the prophets. But Jesus said, verse 31, therefore you are witnesses against yourselves, that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Serpents, brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of Gehenna, of hell? Heavy duty, scathing denunciation for an outward show of religion. People who make a great display, ostentatious, but whose hearts are far from God. You say, if we lived in the days of our fathers, we wouldn't have destroyed the prophets. How many of you ever had a thought? How many of you ever had a thought? Ever in your life? Truth time. Truth time. How many of you ever had a thought that if that were you in the garden, you would not have eaten that apple? I want to see hands tonight. 3? I don't believe it. If I had lived in the garden, if that were me in the garden, I would not have eaten off of that fruit. I would have ran that serpent off. I would not have listened. I would not have allowed him to deceive me. Well, for you three that were honest tonight, I join you because I have had the same thought, young in my years, thinking to myself, just as these Pharisees and scribes would say, you know, if we were living back there, we would have never killed the prophets. We would have been smarter than that. From the very beginning, actually, let me conclude the thought here. Jesus said in verse 34, "Therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city." And as you read the book of Acts, you find that's exactly what happened. The apostles were killed, they were crucified, they were scourged in synagogues, they were persecuted from city to city to city. Read Paul's description of the things that he endured at the hands of the Jews. Okay? These people. Verse 35. "That on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly I say unto you, all these things will come upon this generation." Righteous blood has often been shed by wicked men, all the way from the beginning. There is an enmity in the heart of sinful man against God, and that enmity is expressed in persecution, trying to silence the witness of God's prophets. From the very beginning, righteous blood has been shed by wicked men. We just saw it happen in our generation. Charlie Kirk. We watched it. Wicked men. No matter who it comes out, you realize that you're never going to know the truth about that, right? You do realize that. You're going to be given a narrative, but it's a narrative. It's not, it's probably far from the truth. And what they'll do is they're going to put a hood over that young man, and they're going to line him up, and they're going to shoot him. And then it's case closed, and there should be no more questions asked. But I have questions, my friend. I have lots of questions. From the very beginning, righteous blood has been shed by wicked men. Cain and Abel. Abel was righteous, bringing his sacrifice by faith. God honored it. Cain was wicked. God rejected the sacrifice. He became angry. He got angry at God, then he got angry at Abel, and he killed him. The innocent, righteous blood of Abel was shed, crying up to God from the ground. Now, Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, presents a problem, and there are many suggested explanations. And I'm going to break this down for you, because if you haven't heard the contention here in this passage, you may someday. And I want you to remember what I tell you and how this comes out, because this is controversial here. It's been challenged many times, but it's been challenged from the wrong prefaces. So, in 2 Chronicles 24:20, did I put that in your notes? Okay, perfect. During the reign of Joash, a wicked king, the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest. So the Spirit of God comes upon Zechariah, and he stood above the people, and he said, "Thus saith God, why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord? Because when you do, you cannot prosper. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has also forsaken you." They conspired against him because they didn't want to hear the truth. And they stoned him in the court of the house of the Lord, according to Jewish tradition. That's why the temple was later destroyed by the Babylonians, because of the innocent blood of Zechariah that was shed there. Thus, Joash, the king, remembered not the kindness of Jehoiada, Zechariah's father, but slew his son. And as he died, Zechariah said, "The Lord look upon it and require it." Jesus said the righteous blood from Abel to Zechariah would be required of this generation. How is Zechariah called the son of Barachias here? How is he called the son? The Old Testament prophet Zechariah, who lived some 400 years later, was the son of Barachias. But there's no record of him ever being martyred. It's possible that he was, and it was never recorded. It's also possible that son of Jehoiada referred to a grandfather, a common Hebrew expression, or some kind of an error substituted Barachias for Jehoiada. Something Jerome, one of the early church fathers, noted in some of his manuscripts. But whatever the case, I want you to understand, Jesus' point is clear. And here's what I want you to understand, because you can get lost in all of the history of that. All of the guilt of the righteous blood shed throughout history. Wow. From Abel to Zechariah, Jesus said would come upon that generation. Stephen said before the council, which of the prophets have your fathers not persecuted? And he told them, you're worse than your fathers. You killed the one that they all prophesied about, Jesus Christ. You killed him. So upon that generation would come the guilt of all righteous blood shed by the wicked, because they were the generation that would kill the Son of God. Within just a few days, they did. This was it. Jesus had gone too far for them. They could not allow him to go on any further. They had to silence him or lose their power. And just like with Charlie Kirk. And so they determined that he must die. Someone determined that Charlie had to die. He had to die. And this was Jesus' final word to them, a scathing indictment. Yet even then his heart broke with compassion. Verse 37. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together. As wicked as they were, I still loved them. I still desire their good. I still long to protect them as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings for warmth and safety. But you were not willing. Man's refusal to receive God's love and provision always leads to disaster. See, verse 38, your house is left to you desolate. What does that mean? You have no more defense. God will no longer stand for you. You have forsaken him. He will forsake you. This house, this temple, will be left desolate. The city of Jerusalem will be left desolate. And how true, within 40 years, over 1 million Jews in Jerusalem were slain when the Roman troops came and they devastated the city. Verse 39, for I say to you, you will see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. He would die, he would rise again, he would ascend into heaven, and he will wait until the Jews begin to cry, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. As the book of Hebrews says, God has put all things in subjection under Jesus. But we do not yet see all things in subjection, do we? Not yet. But he will, because they have been put there, but we haven't seen the fruit of it. We will see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor. And he is sitting there expecting, waiting until his enemies are made his footstool. And there will come a day, and Revelation will tell you about it. There will come a day, my friend, when the Jews will see their Messiah. They will behold him as a son. They will behold him as the Son of God, and they will know. Paul said, and at that point, whatever point that is, at that point, all of Israel shall be saved. They will see Messiah for who he is. The only reason today that I give credence and I give support to the nation of Israel, because let's face it, let's look at the nation of Israel. They're anti-Christian. They hate Christians. Okay? They do. They're thieves and robbers, not all, but they control the world's media, the banking systems, everything. Why would I support that nation or a nation like that? It's not for their past. It's not for the present. It's for the future that I see prophetically. The prophetic future of Israel is that they will see. Blindness has come upon them right now, and we have to understand everything that we see wrong with Israel, the state of Israel, is due to blindness that has been put on them. Those blinders, once they repay those 7 years that they owe God, those blinders will come off. They will behold Messiah. And it will be them who leads us into the coronation ceremony. And that's going to be a wonderful thing. We've been grafted into them. Not into the secular government of Israel. I want you to understand that. Nothing to do with secular. I'm talking spiritual Israel. We've been grafted into them. And our hope lies in the future and not the present or the past. Father, thank you for your words tonight. We give you all the glory. We give you all the praise. Just pray you'll seal your word. God, you'll allow us to study it, be hungry for it. Give us hearts to serve, that wants to witness. Fill us, God, with your Spirit. Fill us to overflowing, God, where our feet cannot be stagnant. Our mouths cannot be muted. Our ears will hear, our eyes will see. And let us bear fruit, one with another. Now may the Lord bless and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace, both now and in life everlasting. Amen. No evening service no evening service next Sunday. We are going to have the Veterans Program. Then we're going to have the carry-in. We're going to fellowship back there. And we're going to go home and we're going to rest. And we're not coming back. If you want to come back, you can. But you probably won't get in. Have a great rest of your week. Please be praying one for another.